Tony Kinnett.
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 Host of the Tony Kinnett Cast.
Let's get down to business.
You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WYPC.
WCYTV.
Here on the Daily Signal.
Now all of the cards are on the table, and by that I mean we've really just put down all of the draw fours in the Uno game. At the same time, that's this administration. And so if you got all the good cards in the hand, you got the draw fours, you got the skips, the reverses, you got the phase 10 wild cards somehow, I don't know, you just got all the good cards, then you really have to talk about what you're going to do with them. And I know we could go to Hillsdale, we could talk about Liberty University, but I'm sick of them getting all the attention. And so what we did is we brought on Matt Davis, the CEO of my alma mater, Maranatha Baptist University out of Wisconsin, to talk about what we need for the next couple of years in higher ed. Dr. Davis, howdy.
Hey, thanks for having me on again, Tony. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, because I think that when you look at higher education and you look at what makes higher educations worth sending your kids to and worth spending money on, you got to look at the potential for where the federal government can and will get involved and can genuinely screw it up. So that's what the federal government's done a really stellar job of in the last couple of decades, is ruining higher education. In this next administration, all of the cards are stacked,
level,
right?
Actually, but especially at higher ed. Yeah, it's certainly been a lot of money that's been spent. I think you'd be hard pressed to look for very tangible assessment criteria on exactly how effective that money has been at achieving any of the outcomes or goals that, you know, we were supposed to pursue. In the Obama administration, we were hit from a policy standpoint with two competing agendas. He had what he called the access agenda, and then he had the completion agenda. And so because of that, you put together an access agenda that says everyone, no matter what their undergraduate preparation was, no matter what their secondary preparation or achievement was. In fact, it's racist to even assess that.
Yeah, right.
Everyone should be allowed into college. And then the completion agenda says it's the school's responsibility to make sure that all those people that have been allowed in finish, and that they have to finish in 4 years, 5 years, and then be gainfully employed and make X numbers of dollars. And so when you hear things like the college scorecard and financial value transparency, these are a continuation of that spectrum of assessment, which is a lens of assessment on the colleges. And so when you say it this in the same breath, you have to allow everyone to come, and they all have to graduate regardless of their own personal achievement. And they all have to get employed into positions that pay them, you know, a certain level of salary. And if you don't do that, we're going to force you to be on the hook for any defaults in their financial aid or their student loans. And we're going to put you on the naughty list, the scorecard websites and so forth. And so it really is a big interference in higher education, because it overvalues fields and careers that are going to pay a little bit better, obviously. And then things like the classics, things like religion, which of course is a major focus at Maranatha, fields like education, frankly, that don't pay as much, but that have a pretty major impact on the humanity of our society and the ethics of our society. And over generations, that's going to have a major impact on what the culture looks like in this country.
So you got competing visions that are put upon you by the Federal Department of Education at the request of the White House. And so you have to somehow bring these things to fruition. All of these, which are funny anyway, because I don't know if any of you out there who are listening, who are watching, you've ever been in a classroom, you have remarkably little control over how much your students engage with the material, or remarkably little control as to whether students are going to get things signed by their parents if they take things home. We have an employee survey at work. We can't even get our entire team to complete the employee survey. It's difficult to get that kind of stuff across the finish line. But the federal government through the DOE just says, well, we want you to do it. So what do you think? For the Trump administration, is it just not telling higher ed schools to, just do it and send you the Nike swoosh or what?
Well, the ping pong effect is what's hurting us the most, because it takes about 3.5 years for any new idea to work its way through the regulatory process. And then from there, it takes another 2 or 3 years for higher ed to actually implement that new regulations expectations. By that time, we're already potentially into a brand new administration, which throws out all the old rules and then back to the new rules. We've seen this with things like Title IX and the transgender issues and so forth, all of the DEI requirements that were coming through under the Biden administration.
Right.
And so, we're sitting here going, okay, all we want to do is be left alone. We have a faith-based mission. We believe that God's word is the best and highest ideal for how humans ought to live. And we just want to simply live according to our traditional faith that has governed society very well for thousands of years, that values each individual as God created them. And that's all we want to teach. And instead, we're being told by our own Department of Education that those ideas are outdated, that those ideas are hateful, that those ideas are discriminatory, and that we're going to be put out of business if we continue to discriminate and hate. And it's a very puzzling thing because we didn't change. And the breakneck speed of that change and shift in culture is really something that, especially for those of us that are in the private side of this and in the specialized kind of religious educational side of this, it's a dynamic that we really struggle with. Now, obviously, there's a sense of relief now with the Trump administration, but there is a limit to how much he can do. He is talking about some massive changes. I mean, I'm going to do away with the Department of Education. I'm going to, quote, nuke the regional accreditors. I mean, Maranatha is accredited by the Higher Learning Commission. It's the oldest and largest of what was formerly called regional accreditors. Mm-hmm. That's the highest form of accreditation an institution can receive. We worked hard for that. It's a valuable thing. It's a helpful thing. But the key factor that most people don't necessarily understand is that the federal government has given authority to these private entities called regional accreditation to do the approval for the federal government that gives access to colleges to receive Pell Grants, federally guaranteed student loans, and other kinds of financial aid. And so that's the connection. And if what I understand, if I'm reading between the lines correctly, that what Trump's agenda includes would be somewhat of a decoupling of that federal financial assistance with the regional accrediting, it will throw higher education into an absolute unknown, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know how to describe what that would look like. Chaos would basically ensue.
So
and maybe that's what it needs. I don't know.
Yeah. So I mean, that's kind of. I'm looking at a system that is, and when I would go talk to, there are 2 state legislatures that I advise on education policy, and just had a conversation with one of these 2 about this the other day. That their state constitution mixed with education policy has created a big bowl of spaghetti. And you cannot tell, based on looking at the bowl of spaghetti, whether one policy, one department, one micro department, one contractor, one subsidiary to the contractor is connected to another policy or contractor or et cetera down the line. And if you snip one thing out, it's like a very poorly wired house. You might end up disconnecting, you go to pull out the outlet in the bedroom and somewhere down in the living room, the third outlet on the left just lost power because they were connected inexplicably. And I don't know if, first of all, because things take so much time, right? You talk about some of these mandates from the government moving through, taking 2 or 3 years to actually take effect in the universities themselves. Wouldn't cutting some of this stuff out in mass, because some of the festering rot, which to me looks like the hired bureaucrats that are appointed to oversee little bits and bobs of these connections, the sauce of the spaghetti, if you will, they're still making tons of money on the back of the American taxpayer to decide if Pearson is going to get to ratify the EdTPA version in Oklahoma, Nevada, and Utah for the 2027 through 2029 year. That's a position in the federal government. I don't, why not cut it out? I mean, obviously there's I hear this argument with teaching licenses that we don't want to remove teacher licensure because so many people worked hard for it that it would throw the work that they put into it away. But
no, that's protectionist. So I'll tell you the secret is the entrenched forces aren't going to go softly. Okay. So
you don't say.
They will fight back. The swamp fights back, right? And in higher education,
the swamp fight. I like that.
In higher education, the federal government's involvement has done nothing but increase the cost of college. College is ridiculously expensive. It's stupidly expensive. My son is at a very recognizable school in South Bend, and he's finishing his second year in law school. He's doing a tremendous job. An undergraduate degree at Notre Dame is approaching $100,000 a year for a bachelor's degree.
That's nuts.
Tuition.
That's nuts.
Now, I know that's Notre Dame, but you go here in Wisconsin, Ripon or Edgewood or some of these other private, what I call kind of secular private Concordias and things like that. They're well north of $50,000-$60,000 a year. Who is affording this?
Right.
Okay. The answer is no one. They're putting it all on the student loans. The federal government, the Pell Grant is in the $7,800 range a year. Okay, so that's on top of that. And then all that happens, then the school has all this bureaucratic response that it has to do in order to qualify for this financial aid. And we have all these levels of middle management and assessment and accountability and transparency. And financial aid offices went from, I was just telling somebody the other day, our financial aid office used to be two guys that were like a former youth pastor, a wonderful guy. And, the qualification was you needed to be kind of a people person,
right,
and help students when they came in, be a shoulder to cry on and help them with some paperwork. Now it's a highly regulated, everybody has to be licensed and certified. And the stakes are incredibly high because there's millions of dollars that we depend upon. And I'm all for simplifying it. It's just that, that game where you pull the sticks out and the marbles are in there.
Yeah.
And you just are not sure which exact stick you're going to pull out and the whole thing collapses. And I do see, so two things that come to mind. Elon Musk's strategy for testing rockets, where you just kind of fail upwards and you learn from failure and you fail quick and then you iterate. That works great when you have unmanned rockets. You wouldn't do that with people's lives, right? Mm-hmm. Of course not. That'd be inhumane. But I don't think you can necessarily take that radical and aggressive approach to changes in higher education when you have a system that exists for a couple hundred years and it's entrenched and kind of works this one way. And then you're just going to start, well, let's just burn it down and start over. Well, there's 4,000 plus colleges and universities in this country, all of which have faculty that own the curriculum and academic freedom. And it's a slow moving machine.
The answer then is that you need to completely revitalize, or I would say reshape how the culture views secondary education. Because if you can't, again, and this is really an excellent argument towards why just passing a law and then going back to sleep doesn't work for a functional republic or a dysfunctional republic either. That
vigilance.
And not just vigilance, but an actual second. I mean, it's not just a circumspect, let's be careful that universities don't bring back X, Y, or Z or fall into this pit. It really is a question of, why are we going to university? Why are we sending students to colleges? And I was listening to a small dissertation this morning on the reforming of some of the Ivy League's principles from their original foundings. And it's depressing to look at what some of these places have become. I don't even know the solution to this. Obviously, we can't wave a wand and say, hey, culture, fix yourself. I mean, that's where revival comes into play, but I don't know.
There has to be a reason. And I talk to our own people about this all the time. It's mission, right? Like I have our mission statement framed over here, but we're developing leaders for ministry in the local church in the world to the praise of God's glory. And that comes straight from the Bible, right? There's a reason why a student comes to Maranatha, because they say, I want to prepare for whatever field. We have every major. I was a business graduate from Maranatha back in the 90s, went on to law school. We prepare people for every walk of life that God may call them to do. But we're mission focused and laser focused on that. And you know that from your experience at Maranatha. And we actually mean what we say. When we say we're a Christian university, that permeates every aspect of what we do. If you're just casual about your mission and you expect people to come and drop $50,000 a year at your university, people are going, it's not worth it anymore. And especially, and the thing that hurts me right now is that the conservative talking point, and we've had Charlie Kirk on our campus a number of times, and he speaks to our students. He does camps here, and I think he has a very interesting platform. And politically, a lot of the things he says make a lot of sense to me. But he's really hardcore on this. College is a scam, and it's not worth it. And that's a little bit of the conservative talking point right now. Guys like Mike Rowe and others who I really, I love dirty jobs, but they're saying, hey, we got all these professions out there. Just skip college. All they're going to do is turn you into a woke liberal. You're going to think your parents are a bunch of racist, backwards hicks. And let me tell you something. Most of secular higher ed is devastatingly effective at doing exactly that. That is their intended goal.
Yeah.
But there are alternatives. There are still colleges that you can trust to send your young person to that can train and isn't, that's traditional family values and kind of now it's old fashioned, but I think of it as just normal. All right.
Right.
And I feel like if this election said anything, it's like the American people finally woke up and said, could we just get back to normal? Like, could we focus on the things that matter, like making our communities a safer place and have some kind of shared values and national identity and secure borders and an educational system that actually teaches the fundamentals that we need our students to learn and not so carried away with, every fringe and lunatic theory that's out there these days. So there are places like Maranatha that continue to exist. And there's been a lot of schools close, and a lot of the studies, the article I sent you this morning, you've got to make the case as to why a student should come to your campus. And with online and so many other options, if you can't make that case, you probably will close.
And kind of within, I want to phrase this right. If I'm going to consider sending my kid or encouraging my kid to choose a specific path, they have to move past the going for the sake of the brand. So there's this idea that a lot of the reason that people want to go to Harvard has nothing to do with the fact that they want to go to Harvard. They don't actually know anything about the campus. A lot of students who apply to Harvard don't even know that it's in Massachusetts. They don't even know that anything about the Ivy Leagues or what it is that they're about or their history or what it is they want to study there or what programs are best at that university. I mentioned in a conversation with some individuals in kind of the public sector the other day that everyone knows that University of Wisconsin is kind of nationally known for a robust education program, or at least it used to be. And they looked at me like I was from the moon. And that was wild that really we've forgotten in a large part where certain universities excelled or didn't do as well or what they focused on because the brand is, I'm a Harvard graduate. Oh, I'm a Yale graduate. Oh, I went to this academy. And there's, I think, a kind of an awakening in the country where people are realizing that the brand doesn't mean a whole lot when the blue-haired barista is walking out of Harvard with a degree. She can't even spell her own name. And I'm supposed to pretend like it's still an institution that should be taken seriously. I mean,
no, you're right. It's administrators like me at those other campuses that failed to uphold the founding purpose and mission of those organizations. They turned the entire campus over to the students and said, what do you want us to be?
Claudine Gay at Harvard would, again, like your role brought over into that university, consistently failed, not only in her work on campus, fulfilling the goals that supposedly she set. And to kind of bring things full circle, I think it's funny how you talk about the kind of goals that are illustrated for the Department of Education or for these universities. I was amazed to hear you suggest that anyone is actually setting serious goals, because they're not quantifiable. They are not even measurable. They're just a bunch of warm, fluffy words. We think that education will be better. That's the goal. Great. So glad I'm spending $2.6 billion on this. But with regard to Claudine, in her own personal academic life, plagiarism, lying about the types of committees that she served on, the kinds of meetings that she did, the work that she'd done previously. And if that's the model of excellence that you're setting for your students, how could you expect Harvard to do anything under her leadership? Now, of course, she's gone in the first place.
Yeah, I think the principle that we try to teach here is that we cannot help our students become something that we ourselves are not. And so we have to be the kinds of leaders that we're helping them become. We have to be ethical. We have to think about others. We have to be collaborative. We have to lean on the best consensus that we can form. We have to be careful about that. And I think in the religious side of things,
that's where I was going next. I'm glad you're moving there.
Yeah, the tendency is to maybe be a little top down in that approach. But for us, we have a model in the Lord Jesus that, as far as servant leadership goes, he focused on a small team, his disciples. Even within the disciples, there were 3 of the 12. Mm-hmm. If you look at his experience, even the Lord Jesus, the perfect man, the Son of God, the sinless, holy Son of God, still lost one. I mean, Judas betrayed him, was one of the inner circle, right? Mm-hmm. Right. And then he had larger followers. So there's layers, there's levels, there's so much to be learned from that. And it's not that we have to be perfect. I mean, goodness, we've all done things that we regret, or that we look back and realize that we failed. But we do have to exhibit, I think, a level of leadership that would cause someone, like a parent of a college-age student, to say, hey, those folks have something that I'd like my son or daughter to become like,
I think
Tony Kinnett.
Professors, because you're going to become like them. These are the people that you're going to look up to and follow, and they're going to mentor you, hopefully. And you ought to look at what they've accomplished and what they're all about. If it's all about their own advancement, then that's probably not the place you want to go. If they're about investing in the students, like our faculty are, it's as much about what happens outside the classroom as it is about what happens in the classroom.
And that's the key, because in order to actually see an authentic education experience, you got to see them outside the classroom as well as inside the classroom. This was one of the reasons why, and I think the very first time you and I talked after I was out of university, and it may have been back when I was with Chalkboard Review, that we talked about that my preferred education model is the master and the apprentice, because it has worked throughout human history. It is the model that works. Student teaching, I learned far more, no offense to the excellent education faculty at MBU. I learned more about education when I was student teaching than at any time before. It was incredible. I'm sure you as well, when you were, working out the law stuff on the job under a master.
Know what you don't know when you're sitting in the classroom as an undergrad.
Exactly.
And you get out in the real world and you go, this is why they were talking about that.
So
for sure.
When I look at, I don't think that there were any Maranatha faculty that went to the church that I attended at East Delavan, but I know that I was able to communicate with them. They lived, nearby. Often I would see them around town. I would see them out of class, just around campus. And the authenticity was easy to see, because there's an honesty that comes in real walking with Christ, biblically founded Christianity, and recognizing my faults, recognizing like my goals, and being able to talk with you about those, and how effortless it is for us to kind of switch into talking about that.
Right.
You can't manufacture that elsewhere. You know what I'm saying? Like, if I go to, I remember this, I was like looking for this with some of my master's degree Ball State faculty. I'm like looking for them to show me a little bit more from their life. And it was so disconnected and sterile that I got less from the class, even though I would argue I was probably one of the most engaged in the program, because I was spending, $20,000 on these 2 master's degrees. I kind of wanted to get the most I could out of them. I really wanted to improve. So Maranatha's not paying me to have you on and talk about this. I reached out to you.
Oh, good.
Well, I just realized, I'm like, man, it sounds like I'm giving an ad for Maranatha right now. And no, that's not the case, but there
are others. There's plenty of other small schools that you could look at, like Maranatha, and we're not certainly for everyone, but I think the model shows that if you're going to survive at this level, if you don't have that kind of brand name recognition like you're talking about. The sad thing is, a lot of kids will pick a college based on a football team that they see on Saturday. Right. That's a really bad reason to choose a college. and to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars somewhere. But
it's just so much.
I mean, it's kind of disheartening, honestly. But I look at what some of the experiences are at these other places, and it seems to me that you use some of the examples of Harvard's and so forth. Their administration is trying to be as disconnected from students and student life as they possibly can. They see them as like, something to be tolerated. At MBU, we love our students. We just recently went through a tragedy on campus, and we lost a student. Her name was Hannah Glass, and she was just a beautiful young lady. And that was devastating for our campus, but it has brought us together. And we have learned to demonstrate our faith in new ways that perhaps we wouldn't have talked about if we didn't have that experience.
There's a difference between addressing the student body and talking about Hannah's legacy and talking about her family and talking about what it means to grieve and to look in expectation towards heaven and to issue a corporate statement.
Well,
both the university will tell you that the corporate university will tell you that the prepared official statement is meaningful and it has all of the same emotion that addressing the student body would, but I don't think it does. The corporate jargon, it's so sterile, it's not personal at all, and I think that's a clear contrast. I
wrote our first and only public, I guess you could say, response about it. First of all, I don't think it was our place to break the news kind of thing. And her family, I worked with them very carefully. But on Sunday afternoon, when she went home to be with the Lord about a week and a half ago now, I posted what I had collected, what I had gathered, what we had all experienced. And that went on my personal social media accounts.
Right. It wasn't some sterile, distant university letterhead from the administration out of X office. Yeah.
No, that's me sitting at home on a Sunday afternoon, sharing my heart. This is what we're dealing with. And it was raw. It was emotional. It was difficult, but that's how we were all feeling. And I told our students on Monday, I said, this may be the first time that you, as a young person, have ever lost someone close to you in that sense, that someone's that's passed away. But it won't be the last time. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in your life, you will someday again experience this loss. And so the fact that this happens, it's unusual. It doesn't usually happen. It's only the fifth time, maybe sixth time since the founding of our college that this has happened. It's unusual. But that the fact that this has happened now, it gives us also then a chance to walk this road together. And so at her funeral last Wednesday, we shut down the college. We canceled classes for several hours. We all went to her funeral. It was standing room only. Hundreds of our students literally stood.
You say literally standing room only, yeah.
Literally. And there were people. We were parking the overflow parking lots. And most of our students did not even know this young lady. But she was one of us, and we wanted to be there to support the family. And we wanted to, it might sound funny, but we wanted to confront this. Death is a horrible thing. It's a terrible thing. It separates loved ones. But for the believer, it's not a permanent loss, and it's something that we can suffer. We do suffer it, but we suffer it together as Christians. And there's a different kind of reality that we have to learn to navigate through that.
So there's two things that I want to pull out of that. And I just because of who I am, I'll probably go anecdote second. Otherwise I'll get lost in it. The distinction that I made about the prepared, pre-released, sterile statement and addressing the student body was clear in how you framed it. And it illustrates my point perfectly, that you said that you sat down and that you wrote the statement, but where you developed your point was in the next day when I addressed the student body. Here's what I talked to him about. Here's what I said. Here's why I said it. And then we went on that together. Again, there you go. I mean, that proves the point that the direct student address, that the authentic in front of you, here we are, it holds a kind of meaning to everyone who is observing that cannot be reproduced, and it can't be corporately and artificially created. All right, putting that aside, here's the anecdote. When I came to speak at Maranatha a couple of weeks before the election, I went that evening to my old dorm, to Cary dorm. And I got a chance to kind of give a dorm devo. And I had some fun, and, we just, talked about, being men and, kind of throwing away toxic masculinity and being there for each other and all that kind of thing. Sure, of course. And I'm assuming that you're laughing because you're imagining it, not because you've heard what I said down there.
No, I didn't, but I'm a caring man myself.
Okay,
so
good.
I just know what that experience is like.
Right. Excellent. Good. All right. Moving right along. So at one point I turned the conversation very sharply because they were laughing and enjoying it. And I'm kind of teasing the guys, and, you tease whom you love, that kind of a thing. And so I turned it sharply on its head, and I told them the story of when a friend of mine in college, his sister's brand new husband had lung cancer. This was Joey Neal. His sister's new husband had cancer, and then his mom had cancer like right after that. And it was just a horrible time for that family. And I remember that we spent probably 2, 3, 4 hours maybe on the basement floor of Cary Dorm, which at the time was not a nice basement. Now it's a lot better. And we prayed together as a dorm. Guys who didn't know Joey's sister or his mom, didn't even know Joey, but just on the floor prayed together. And it's that kind of an experience. When you talk about going and being on campus and what college actually can be, that is a point in practice that is not something that is encouraged perhaps at other kind of more corporate level universities, but is nonetheless important. And
right,
I don't even have a point to that. That's just, I don't know, kind of an anecdote off of what you
said.
Yeah.
You can find communities of faith at every college. You have to work pretty hard to find that in different locations around the country.
I found that out with a lot of the Jewish chapters. What are the names for the Orthodox kind of Jewish groups that are on several campuses that they have a very, very close community?
Yeah. So you can find that, and you should, if that's where God opens the door and you feel led that you need to go there. But I will say that there's a difference between it's possible for your faith to survive in those systems versus what is the system designed to do. And at Maranatha, the system is designed to build your faith and to grow you in Christ-likeness and to reinforce the founding and conservative values of this nation that have actually propelled this to be a place that not only it is used of God here, but that has been used to send missionaries all around the world and continue to reach the world for Christ. And of course, I look at that from a Christian standpoint because that's who I am, and I don't apologize for that. But there's a very big difference between those two realities. And there are a dwindling number of schools that will actually say that America was not founded as a racist institution, and that it's actually got that Western principles are actually good for all humanity, and that as those principles work their way fully through, the sort of flaws of the founding, such as the major ones of like slavery and
you can't rev me up on this
like that
34 minutes into the conversation and just like basically hang for an education policy turned general pundit. That's like,
let's just say that your listeners know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And this is a self-selecting group, right? So they know exactly what I mean. And there are still places like Maranatha that do that, but it's definitely a dwindling number. And you got to ask yourself, could my faith survive over here versus this is a place that is designed to bolster and grow my faith and my conservative principles and my ideals. Now, does it work 100% of the time? No, because we have human beings that are in charge of it and human beings that attend. So you have the human factor that goes in. But I will say this. Every single person at Maranatha that works here, that gets a paycheck, so to speak, they see it as a ministry, and they are 100% devoted to the success of our students.
And to clarify, when you say they see it as a ministry, because this is something that I've learned. I was in a restaurant. This is before I actually worked for the Daily Signal, I think. We were sitting around. I was with some of the Heritage Foundation people, and they were talking about kind of the differences between that some traditional Catholic churches were having and like more modern Catholic churches were having. And just like, little schisms and arguments and whether they should use more modern music or whether they should, read from scripture during the service, things that we have discussions about. Like when we're talking, we'll talk about how, oh, geez, here the Southern Baptists are at it again. Oh, that kind of again, we've talked about it.
The inside political baseball. Yeah.
Right. And after a few minutes, they stopped and they looked at me sympathetically and they said, "Oh, Tony, we're so sorry. We forgot you weren't Catholic. You don't know what we're talking about at all, do you?" And I laughed because I said, no, I do know what you're talking about. You guys just have different names for it. And anyway, the reason I'm going to explain ministry, when you say that the teachers say they treat their profession as a ministry, we're not saying that they treat it like church. We're not saying that they treat it like going out door knocking on Saturday afternoon, or that they only... Yeah. No. When we say they treat it as a ministry, that it is a very precious, all-encompassing aspect of life service for them. Their work at Maranatha is their life. It is encouraged to be their life. They're encouraged to devote their work and their spiritual walk with Christ in the favor of serving to make disciples, to make leaders, as the mission statement clearly puts.
Yeah, I look at it like we're trying to accomplish something beyond just this life in this world. And so we are serving for a higher calling, a purpose in life that matters beyond this life, that really is going to impact eternity. If that's not motivating, then I don't know what is. That's a motivation that transcends the financial incentives that an employer could provide. And so when I say ministry, I mean that whether you're here working diligently on our custodial team or our grounds team, that number one, they look at that as a stewardship. These are the Lord's buildings, and so I need to maintain them at the highest possible level for the cheapest possible amount of money. Mm-hmm. And they do a phenomenal job with just the actual secular components of their work because they're doing it as unto the Lord, right? There's a stewardship that goes with that. But beyond that, then it's the people around here that are going to last for eternity. Someday, these buildings will crumble. They're old. I mean, Old Main was built just after the Civil War. It's a phenomenal facility. But someday it won't be here. But the lives, every soul that comes across this campus is eternal. And so we have the opportunity to impact eternity, not just with the secular work that we do, the mundane paperwork or the accreditation assessment reports and things that we spend so much time doing,
right,
in order to keep our financial aid status and all that, but also in taking the time to speak into the lives of our students, to speak truth to each other and sometimes to ourselves, and to focus on our worship, but also on edifying and uplifting those that are around us. So it's about that higher calling. And that's what I mean by ministry.
I really don't think that I have anything that can top that off or expound upon that and add substance to it in any way that's, kind of worth bringing that forward to. So I guess with that, Dr. Matt Davis, CEO at Maranatha, thanks for coming on for what I think we started out to make kind of a 10-minute interview and ended up being our special episode in its entirety for Thursday. So thank you very much, man.
Well, I trust to be a blessing to folks, maybe a challenge to some thinking. And look, no matter who's in the White House, we know who's on the throne.
Oh, that's the truth. Absolutely. Although I got to tell you, at the moment, or I should say, in addition, at the moment, I'm not exactly frowning at the present turn of events.
It's a happy result, and frankly, something that I think is once again God's mercy on us that we have, a moment again of some freedom to breathe a little bit.
Absolutely. Thank you guys very much for tuning in. This has been the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated. We'll be back tomorrow to round out the week with the
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Well, a little bit unusual here if we're saying some things that were supposed to happen this week and perhaps not supposed to happen as far as this particular episode was concerned, because there is just too much breaking news to let the show end where originally I was going to have it end, with the end of that interview from Dr. Matt Davis over at Maranatha. Very quickly, and I say that because we are getting ready to hop online over with Tim Young over on X. There is just a bit too much that has decided to develop in the last couple of hours that we cannot share it with you. So first and foremost, Congressman Matt Gaetz from Florida has stepped down from the nomination. And so he is no longer in the running for Attorney General. His statement was, "I had excellent meetings with senators yesterday, and I appreciate their thoughtful feedback and the incredible support of so many. While the momentum was strong, it is clear that my confirmation was unfairly becoming a distraction." And so Ben, he basically talks about being committed to making sure that Donald Trump's administration is very good. This threw everything into a tizzy, because as far as nominations were concerned, this was the weakest one in the Senate. As far as nomination procedures are concerned at all, this is the one that was going to struggle. Pete Hegseth is not as big of a deal as a lot of people have made it. Linda McMahon, also, I don't think is going to have any trouble in her Senate nomination hearing. So when we're taking a look at the other information surrounding the Attorney General nomination, we have to look at Matt Gaetz and where he's going to go from here. And then we're going to look at who Trump has nominated to be his AG pick following Matt. So first of all, on Matt Gaetz, his particular case was a little interesting because he resigned immediately from the 118th Congress of the United States before he'd even gone through the confirmation process. Normally, what we see is the individual who has been nominated for a particular position wait until they have been confirmed to resign from their post. Because if they're not actually nominated, then you don't want to give up seats in Congress. So that's a little bit interesting. Now Gaetz is walking that back. So now the kind of the scuttlebutt, the legalese that's being used over on that great paramour of excellent reporting over at X.com. Those who say that they are close to congressmen, this could very well turn out to be true. Kind of a loophole, but a funny one. Gaetz resigned from the 118th Congress, but he was elected to serve in the 119th Congress. The 119th Congress. So it looks like Gaetz probably will be going back into that seat and basically dodged the metaphorical bullet as far as losing his job in Congress right after he was reelected and not getting the nomination. So who is Trump replacing Gaetz with? He is replacing Gaetz in the nomination for the Attorney General slot with Pam Bondi from Florida. Pam Bondi. All right, let's go over her record. She was a prosecutor, 20 years. Tough on violent criminals, and Trump says made streets safe for Florida families. She's Florida's first female attorney general. She would be the second female attorney general in the history of the United States, following Reno for Clinton. She's very, 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 very hawkish on illegal immigration and on the war on things like trafficking fentanyl. So a very, very competent attorney general, obviously being a state attorney general, very qualified. And you can tell that this bomb dropping right here, going with Pam Bondi from Florida, has the libs in an absolute tizzy. So already on MSNBC this evening, they're freaking out. And do me a favor, listen to how they're freaking out about Pam Bondi.
Pam Bondi is exactly what I was saying in the last segment that we should all fear, because she's competent. We may not agree with her ideologically, but she actually knows how to do this job. So if anyone on the Democratic side or anyone who cared about liberty or justice was thinking, well, maybe Matt Gaetz will screw this up and that'll give us some time. No, Pam Bondi knows what she's doing. She knows what she's doing about immigration. Remember, Florida is one of those states that's been very aggressive about migrants and deportation and moving people to different states and everything else like that. Florida has enacted all sorts of rules and laws to curtail students and what they can do on campuses and finding legal justifications for manipulating education.
I love it. I love it. They're terrified because she's good at her job. By the way, I do love the problem is that they actually can recognize that a maverick in the position is, again, a serious enough of a problem for Democrats because they have so often over the last couple of administrations used federal bureaucratic power to act politically with the legal arm of the government against their opponents. And now they have someone who's not only going to be very hawkish and accomplish the Trump agenda, but is very good at being an attorney general as well. And so the left just, again, openly saying, oh no, she's incredibly good at her job as well. On the Matt Gaetz side of things, it isn't ending all too poorly for him because you still have people like the crew at The View, the angry Handmaid's Tale ladies who I guess their main hobby is whining in a fetal position in a corner. They had to back up a few problematic legal statements, shall we say. This would be accusing Matt Gaetz of things that you're legally not allowed to accuse people of, and then having to read a legal statement on air. This is just some incredible stuff.
How could you nominate someone with allegations of child trafficking trafficking across state lines and having sex with a 17-year-old? My understanding, further on in the interview, they discussed the fact that once he finds out that she's 17, he stops having sex with her.
Okay, Sonny, you have a legal note.
I do have a legal note. Thank you, Whoopi. Matt Gaetz has long denied all allegations, calling the claims, quote, invented, and saying in a statement to ABC News that this false smear following a 3-year criminal investigation should be viewed with great skepticism. That DOJ investigation was closed with no charges being brought.
You know, one of the basic rules in journalism or broadcasting is don't say extremely stupid things unless you have the sources and the data to back them up. You can't just get out there and accuse every single person around of being insert bad thing here. You can't. Legally, that is not allowed because it basically creates a system of causing damages to a person, making it impossible for them to work, making it impossible for them to do various things. Only accuse an individual of doing something if you preface what it is that you're saying with, I was told this by this person, or I believe this based on this particular set of evidences. Just going out with, ex cathedra declaring to the world, hey, Matt Gaetz did this. All right, see you in court, pal. You actually have to do the work. And you and I both know that Sunny Hostin can very likely struggle. She very likely can probably not even finish a few pages worth of reading, much less remember the basic principles of broadcasting. So, just an on par for The View. In other news, Jussie Smollett, the guy who, according to him, at 2 a.m. was walking down the snowy streets of Chicago. You know Chicago. Picture Chicago in your mind. Picture the politics of the people in Chicago. Okay, we'll keep moving. He then says that he was beaten like half to death and amazingly avoided any bruises or like any kind of lacerations or anything, but he was beaten up by 2 guys on the street, mugged, although he escaped with his Subway sandwich unscathed, like the bag wasn't even wet. And then he got home and said that, these 2 guys, these 2 MAGA guys, they started beating me up because I'm a black guy. And then they shouted, this is MAGA country, because, Chicago, the most MAGA place on earth. And all of the libs got out there and suggested that he was a brave man for surviving a hate crime. And then it turned out that not only was he lying, but he was super duper lying. And he was charged because you're not allowed to get out there and falsify police reports and federal hate crime reports. Well, the Illinois Supreme Court, after Jussie Smollett was convicted in the state of Illinois for making up a big hate crime story and wasting a bunch of taxpayer resources and money, and not to mention the time of a lot of dedicated officers and investigators, the Illinois Supreme Court has just overturned that conviction. So I don't want to hear J.B. Pritzker bragging about that ridiculous, silly state ever again. And I promise you that if I am ever elected governor of the state of Indiana, that after I take office, I will declare this the Greater Republic of Indiana, and I will invade Illinois, cut off the city of Chicago, and push it into Lake Michigan until it goes underwater, which, given that Chicago was at or very slightly below sea level, which is why they had to raise the streets in the late 1800s, early 1900s, would not be difficult. And Southern Illinois will just become part of Indiana. And for that matter, also, those of you in Ohio, you better watch your back because I'm coming for you next. a little bit on the last bit of news here. At long last, after 16 days, Bob Casey has finally conceded to Senator-elect McCormick from Pennsylvania. Dave McCormick, an amazing guy. Obviously, I like him probably first and foremost because he's a West Point grad, but also he's just an incredible individual. Was ahead like 25,000 votes through the entire process. And then it came out that as Casey was refusing to concede that he lost, that you had election officials in Pennsylvania on the left side of the aisle who were openly admitting they knew they were violating the law and counting illegal ballots, which, you know what, that looks really, really badly. And so even after Schumer had backed down and there were rumors that several Democratic senators had called in and said, hey, Casey, resign, he's finally decided to resign. So a lot of news going on at present. Last but not least, this is before we kind of sign off for the evening and head over on, at least for me, I'm heading over to hop on with Tim Young and his crew. The international situation is getting a little bit serious. And so I want to make a very clear point. From what we understand yesterday, that after Biden had approved Ukraine using United States-built long-range missiles in its defense of its own territory against Russia, which, as a reminder, Ukraine is the invaded territory. It has a right to use any weapons it deems necessary at all to defend its sovereign territory. If you don't like that, I'm sorry, that's the truth. If you approach my property and if you step onto my property and you come with violent intent and you start trying to harm me or my family, I will use whatever weapon I have at my disposal to make sure that you come no further onto my property with your intent to cause harm. So I don't think so. Also, the whole Ukraine and Russia is going to be World War III. No, Russia couldn't even conquer like a medium farm basket country in Europe whose defenses, even with funding, are mediocre at best. No. Also, like Russia's missile defense and interception systems, as well as its launch systems, run on software that's likely rivaled by like Fisher-Price. So, no. And the most important thing here is that there was rumors that Putin, I guess, had launched an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile, to strike a city in Ukraine. It turns out that was not an ICBM. That is misinformation that was an ICBM. That's not what an ICBM is. If you want to know what actually Russia used to strike that city, Russia basically took the equivalent of a surface-to-air missile, rigged it to explode a little bit later, altered the guidance systems, and then stapled some extra propulsion system stage rocket onto the back of it. Meaning that not just like they increased the amount of propulsion fuel, they actually strapped on, at least from what we believe, according to the intelligence reports, like an extra stage propulsion system. It's not an ICBM. So everyone out there that's running around going nuclear war, it ain't. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry, actually. I'm very thankful. But that's not the case. When Victor Davis Hanson and other military historians start getting nervous, who are on my side of the aisle and I believe analyze things very professionally, when they start getting nervous, I promise I will let you know. That's the quick news roundup. Unusual to be at the end of the show. Really appreciate your guys hanging around for a little quick news update. Have a wonderful evening. We will be back tomorrow, and